Oh, you have a second copy. You can finish it in one afternoon. You can finish it in one and sit in the couch for an hour and a half and finish it. It's not very big. Okay. We're on Pehei Yomad Aleph 85a. So I didn't get to look at all the details with regard to the question of end of life, though I'm pretty confident in what we shared yesterday with respect to the difference between the heart stopping and the few moments till the brain shuts down. But I did get to look at the way a fetus is formed. And I was somewhat correct. It does happen as a kind of combination. It starts from the center, right? The umbilical cord goes to the center. But the first thing to develop from the center is the head and heart. So it's a kind of combination of both opinions as to which is formed first. The head is definitely formed first. I couldn't find anywhere that stated which was first, the heartbeat or the brain. It seemed like both developed initially right at the beginning. Like at the beginning, it's only tissue, but the tissue becomes later the brain and the heart. So I couldn't see anything explicitly into which exactly comes first. But it is like that, where it grows from the center. That's where the umbilical cord is. But what comes first is the head. Okay, so today's discussion of the Gemara is going to answer a question. The Gemara doesn't ask the question, but it kind of does ask the question, which is, well, why not die for Torah? How do you know that you should be saving a life and violating Shabbos? Maybe the guy should die. It's Shabbos, right? And in fact, right, there are 3 commandments which we are commanded to give up our life rather than transgress. So just to understand the question, where does the question come from? It shouldn't be obvious. Why should the Gemara even ask and address? Why does the Gemara even need to address why it is that we should save a life rather than violate Shabbos? Like, why would there be assumption to let the guy die? And the answer is in that which we learn in Tanya a number of times. With the essence of life is an attachment to Hashem. That is the definition of life. And anything that's not an attachment to Hashem is by definition a death. Whether it's a literal death is a different question. And theoretically, it actually should be a literal death, which is the premise for Karas, the premise for excision in Torah is death by the hands of heaven, and not so much retribution for misbehaving, but rather just a natural result of disconnecting from the source of life. The source of life is God. You disconnect from the source of life, and there's death. It's just a natural consequence. And the Alter Rebbe therefore argues that in theory, the same thing should apply to every single mitzvah. Because every sin is a detachment from Hashem. And if theoretically a person should say, I'd rather die than do any sin. And the Alter Rebbe, sorry?
One link up the chain.
Yeah. And the Alter Rebbe actually tells us to use this as an argument in the fight with our evil inclination. The evil inclination says, look how delicious that food is. And the counter argument is, are you really willing to detach yourself from the source of life for the sake of 3 minutes of enjoyment? In theory, you are willing to give up your life rather than violate and disconnect from Torah, disconnect from God. And here you're going to go and get a few minutes of pleasure. What for? Come on. That's kind of what Alter Rebbe does there. And Alter Rebbe explains there that in theory, this is correct. In theory, a person should give up his life rather than violate any part of Torah. And the reason we don't is because Torah says, these are the things you should give up your life and these are the things you shouldn't give up your life. But logically or theoretically, every mitzvah wants you to give up their life for. So, yeah, exactly. We say it. Serve Hashem with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your life, everything. Give up everything. Exactly the point. Now, it's theoretically, the Jew says, I'd rather die than do anything against Torah. Oh, your Torah says I should live? Okay, so I'll live because Torah says I should live. That's the premise of the Gemara here. Theoretically, a Jew is willing to say, I'll rather do it, give up everything rather than disconnect from Hashem, including death. Oh, you want me to live? Okay, so I'll live. And that's the Gemara's question. How do you know that one shouldn't die rather than give up Shabbat, rather than break Shabbos? So the Gemara has to find a reason. God tells you not to die. Okay, fine, so I won't. That's kind of where the Jew is coming from. Now, I want to add one more thing. And I said yesterday it was going to be connected to our response to Corona. The halacha is, the details of this are very, very subtle and nuanced, but the general principle is, if a tyrannical government comes down and says no more behaving as Jews, then even if they tell you take your yarmulke off, you should rather die than do that, than take off your yarmulke. Even though kippah is not a biblical commandment, not even a rabbinic commandment, according to some opinions, it's a mitzvah, but for the most part, it's a minhag, it's a custom. But because the reason why the government is cracking down is because it's Jewish, and it's a tyrannical government aiming at stamping out all vestige of Judaism, therefore you should rather die than give in to that. For the principle. It's called Shasa. That's right. The principle of halacha is called Shas Hashmad, a time of forced conversions, in which a tyrannical government is trying to impose their religion and stamp out any vestige of Judaism. This should not be confused with the government telling you not to do certain aspects of Judaism because there's a health crisis. And there's the line. You have to understand. There's a big difference between, and this is a mistake a lot of people make, I think. There's a big difference between a tyrannical government whose stated objective is we want to get rid of Judaism versus a government that may be misleading. Very possible they're making a mistake. I'm not a doctor. I have no idea if the rules they're doing are correct or not correct. It seems to be working. I have no idea. And whether they have to be exactly as defined by the government, I have no idea either. But the premise of the governmental laws are not inherently tyrannical and with the sole objective of, let's get rid of Judaism. If there was no virus and the government came around and said, we want to start curbing Jewish behavior and therefore we're stopping, we don't want shuls to have more than 25 people, then maybe we should put up a fight. Right? But when the underlying logic is a virus, even if they're wrong in their implementation, from Allah's perspective, that doesn't turn the government into a tyrannical government. Because I disagree with the way they impose the law.
And if they would have to do it for all types of homes, houses, and worship.
That's right. It's not as if they're singling out Judaism or singing out everybody. They're closing restaurants too, right? In other words, if they said all synagogues closed, everybody go to a church instead, time to fight. But even misguided law, I'm not arguing for the validity of the law. I really have no clue. I'm not an economist. I'm not a psychologist to know what the mental health issues are, and I'm not a doctor to know what's the word for someone who studies a virus. There's a terminology for it.
Virologist.
What? Epidemiologist, right? People who study epidemics. Right, so that's what I'm saying. I'm not in that field. I have no idea. I hear this way, I hear that way. It's a sidebar. The main point here is that the foundation and the underlying logic, even if it's mistaken and misguided, for why the government is imposing these laws, is not because it's trying to stamp out Judaism, because they're trying to stamp out a virus, even if they're doing it wrongly. And thus, by Jewish law, we probably should follow the government's ruling. Sorry? That's right. If they said no synagogues, everybody go to churches, then by Jewish law, we'd have to stand our ground. And if it means police come and arrest us, so be it. But they're not doing that. So just important to make that clarification as we go forward. That's right. The Stalinist Russia, it was specific. Yeah. Many times like that. Most recent history is communism. Yeah. Well, yeah, communism outlived Germany, so that's the most recent example in history. Okay, we are at the very last line of the narrow lines. The first word in the line is ba'apav, and then the second word is kfar. So the Gemara says like this: It was once that Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Eliezer ben son of Azariah were walking on the way. The Levi Haseder, and Levi the organized one. There's actually different interpretations of what this means, but that was his name, Levi the Seder. That was kind of his nickname. Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, and Rabbi Shmuel, son of Eliezer ben Azariah, Mahalchan Acharem were walking behind them. So three people, presumably the people in the front, have seniority, Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Kiva, and Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah. And then Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah's son, one of those three people, together with a friend, Levi the Seder, are standing behind. So five are walking, three in front, two behind. And Nishila Shaila Zubufneim, and the following question was presented to them. How do we know that one should violate Shabbos rather than come to an issue of a question of life and death? Maybe we should let the guy die rather than, God forbid, break Shabbos. Again, based on the premise we explained before, that in theory a Jew is willing to give up his life rather than violate any part of Torah. So now these scholars are challenged, and they have to find from Torah itself, where Torah itself says, no, please don't die for this. In these three instances, Torah says die. If a question of killing somebody else, God forbid, a question of violating forbidden relations, and a question of idol worship. But in every other area, Torah says, no, don't die. And they're going to find now textual proof of this. So then Rabbi Shmuel responded, V'amar, and said, in the machteres yimtza gan of the law is, this is what Torah says, someone is sneaking into your home to steal. Or he's sneaking into your home, presumably because he wants to steal. Torah says you're allowed to, and an altercation happens and you kill the guy, then you get off scot-free. So legal defense by Torah law, somebody sneaks into your home, trying to put you in danger, and it so happens that you end up killing him, you are not held accountable for that. And then the Gemara explains, so Bishmol explains, Umazeh. Now, when it comes to that story, the machteres, the thief, the burglar who sneaks into your home, shesafik al moment. It's a question: is he coming for your money? Ba is why he's here, or safik al nefashis ba. Maybe he came for your life. I'm not sure why he's here. Maybe he came to murder me. Maybe he came to steal. Right. The question is, not that he came to murder, but that he's okay with murdering me. He's okay with murdering me. Maybe, or maybe he'll just back down and leave the house, or maybe he'll actually, or maybe if an altercation starts, where's he going to go? Is he going to run, or is he going to pull out a gun and shoot me? So because he might pull out a gun and shoot me, therefore I'm allowed to kill him. So I'm not 100% certain that he's going to kill me, but I'm still allowed to kill him. And shvichas damim, and ordinarily murder, is metames haaretz, besides for it being a biblical commandment at the highest order, etc., etc. It defiles the land, and it causes the presence of God to be removed from amongst the Jewish people. And nonetheless, at the risk of murdering somebody, or at the risk of being a murderer, you can save yourself by killing that person, even though murder is one of the worst things. Because
normally murder, you have to give your life.
That's right. We said before that murder is one of those things that you'd rather die than kill somebody. And yet here you can kill him because he might be killing you. Even Shabbos. If it's a question of your life, absolutely. Correct. And if for kal v'chomer, much more so, if the potential of saving my life allows me to murder somebody, then how the more so the potential of saving my life overrides Shabbos, considering that murder is a sin on a higher level than Shabbos. It's interesting that the Gemara does not quote as a proof for why murder is a higher sin by the fact that I should die rather than murder, because theoretically I should die for Shabbos also. The Gemara quotes the fact that murder is a higher sin because it causes impurity on the earth and because it causes the presence of Hashem to leave. And that's how we know it's a greater sin than Shabbos. Because in theory, I should die for Shabbos. If you killed somebody, I'll take your word for it. It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to leave that alone. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah? So it could be a question of a murder. Like, in other words, by Jewish law, is this person who defended his life potentially, does he even qualify as a murderer? The Torah doesn't say don't kill. It's a mistranslation. The Torah says don't murder. There's a difference between kill and murder. A person who's a soldier in battle and kills his opponent is not a murderer. He killed, not a murderer. And in this case, the same thing. A person who's about to shoot me and I kill that person, I'm not a murderer. I killed, it's true. I'm not a murderer by Torah law because I defended my life. Right? And therefore, Torah says even, and this is what Rabbi Shmuel is arguing, if I'm allowed to kill somebody and I'm not considered a murderer because perhaps I'm saving my life, then how the more so I should violate Shabbos to save someone's life. So this is Rabbi Shmuel's logic from Torah itself that saving a life comes before Shabbos. And then Rabbi Kiva Omar. Rabbi Kiva responded and said, the Torah says, "V'chiyazid ish ara'eu," etc. If someone intentionally murdered somebody else, and the Torah says, "Me'im mizbechi," from my altar, tikachenu, take him lamus, to die. It means like this: Me'im mizbechi, from my altar. That's to say, if a kohen is being tried for murder, and it happens to be that it's his week to be serving in the temple. Happens to be his week, and he's serving the temple now. Said the Torah, don't let him finish out his week of service. Take him from his service. He'll leave in the middle of his week of serving the temple and bring him to be killed if he is so tried and found guilty. And therefore he's liable for capital punishment. But v'loi me'al mizbechi, but not from on top of the altar. Meaning to say, the Torah says, take him from within my altar, meaning from when he's holding the middle of the service, take him back, but not when he's on top of the altar. Meaning if he's actually on the altar, wait till he comes down and then take him to the court. But if it happens to be his week of service, he'll skip the last 3 days because he's being taken for capital punishment. Okay, so that's the ruling of the Torah. And the Gemara adds, Rabbi son of Barchana said, this is only taught only if it's a question of this person is liable for capital punishment, and therefore he is destined to be killed. So we take him away from his service. And therefore we don't take him if he's actually in the middle of doing something on the altar. Wait till he's done, and then take him to the court to be killed. But to bring life, meaning to say, if this priest, he's in the middle of standing on the altar, and he's in the middle of offering a sacrifice to God, but he knows some information that can exonerate a person who's on death row, Jewish death row. Some other person is being tried for capital punishment, and they're about to give a verdict. Maybe they even gave a verdict. This person's liable for capital punishment, and he's on his way to the place where he's going to be killed, the Beis HaSkila. So it's called the house of stoning. It's a place where they execute capital punishment. And this kohen who's standing on the altar, middle of serving God, remembers that he has information that can exonerate him. So says the law, he should drop everything he's doing in the middle of serving God on the altar, drop it, run down, go to the court and say, I have information that's going to save this guy's life. So says the Gemara, and this is Rabbi Kiva's logic. In this situation, that kohen who's standing on the altar, we're not sure that his information is actually going to exonerate. It might. And perhaps his information is useless and it's not going to save this guy. And the service in the temple, overrides Shabbos. On Shabbos, the entire temple operates as it does normally, even though many of the services for an ordinary person would be a violation of Shabbos. So the service in the temple overrides Shabbos, and saving this guy's life from capital punishment overrides the service in the temple. which overrides Shabbos. Following? So how much more so? How much more so saving a life directly overrides Shabbos? If saving a life overrides service in the temple, which itself overrides Shabbos, then certainly saving a life overrides Shabbos. This is Rabbi Akiva's logic. And it's a doubt. Well, the Gemara is going to get to that later. At the moment, it seems like that. We'll get to that, yeah. And then in Rabbi Lezer, in both cases, was a doubt. With the burglar in my house, I don't know if he actually intends to kill me. And the guy, the Kohen, we also don't know if his information is going to be valid enough to exonerate the person. And therefore, even when we're not sure if the person is alive or not, we undo the rubble because maybe he's down there. Okay. And then Rabbi Lezer Omar, Rabbi Lezer responded and said, he derives the fact that we should be saving a life from the following law. Umma mila. When it comes to a bris, it's only there to fix one of the 248 limbs of my body. That's in the person. And doicha Shabbos. And yet to fix only one limb in the entirety of the body, we break Shabbos. The law is a bris milah. If it's scheduled on time, meaning if the bris is on the 8th day, then the bris happens on Shabbos also. If the bris happens to be postponed because the baby isn't healthy, then we don't postpone it to Shabbos, we'll push it off to Sunday. Right? If you're anyways doing it the 9th day, then do it the 10th day. But if it's on the actual day, it's on the 8th day, then it overrides Shabbos. If a baby's born on Shabbos, then the next Shabbos the bris happens. That's considered the 8th day, 7 days later. Because day 1, the day of birth, is counted as 1 day, and the day of the birth is also counted as 1 day, making a total of 8. So if to fix one limb, just that one organ, we're violating Shabbos, how much more so to fix his whole body, to save his whole life, Shabbos, that it certainly overrides Shabbos. So this is the conversation observed by Rabbi Levi the Seder and the son of Elazar ben Azariah, whose name was Rabbi Shmuel, as they observed, Rabbi Shmuel the elder, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah themselves discuss this question. Following that, the Gemara raises 3 more different ways of understanding, or three different ways of deriving the fact that one should save a life rather than violate Shabbat. Rather, one should save a life even if it means to violate Shabbos. And we're going to read those 3 and then we'll conclude. Rabbi Yossi, son of Yehuda, says, he wasn't at this conversation, but he answered the same question. The verse says, please guard my Shabbos, says God. Perhaps we suggest that that's a universal statement. Everybody must keep Shabbos, even if it means you die. Talmud Yoma comes the verse and says, but you shall keep my Shabbos. The word but means that there's some that are yes and some that are no. Chalak. There's a split. Some yes, some no. One of the areas when no, you don't keep Shabbos, when it's a question of life and death. Okay. So that's Rabbi Yossi's view. Rabbi Yonasan, son of Yosef, says, Ki kodesh hi lachem, for Shabbos is holy unto you. Explains Rabbi Yonasan, Hi misur b'yedchem, Shabbos is given into your hands for you to observe. But you are not in its hand to die for it. It's in your hand. You're not in its hand. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Torah serves the Jew, not the Jew serving Torah. How's that? How does Torah serve a Jew? As my father, Rabbi News, often says, Torah doesn't make you Jewish. You're Jewish already. Torah is there to express your Judaism. So Torah serves the depth of the Jewish soul to express it and give it life, but not the reverse. Not the reverse. The Jew comes before Torah. And then Torah is there to express the depth of the greatness of one's Judaism. And if it's a question of life and death, life takes precedent because the Jew overrides. Except for those, because it still goes back to the original premise. A Jew would say, I'm willing to give up everything rather than violate Torah. But Torah says, no, I want you to stay here, except for these 3 things. Okay. Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh, Rabbi Shimon son of Manasseh says, "V'shamru b'nei Yisrael Shabbos." The Jewish people shall guard the Shabbos as a Torah. Amra Torah, the Torah says, "Chalal of Shabbos achas." Violate one Shabbos, K'dei sheyish mishabbos eshaybei, so that later this very person can keep many more Shabbosim. Torah says, "Keep my Shabbos." And if you let this guy die, you've lost my Shabbos. Same premise. The whole reason for the Torah is for the Jew to live and express his Judaism. And here this guy's dying, undermining the very purpose of what Torah is here to do. And therefore Torah says, keep my Shabbos, save his life, so that he can keep more Shabbosim. So what's unique about this explanation is that in the previous ones, it's like a loophole. Which one overrides which? Life or Shabbos? Life is more important, okay, so violate Shabbos. Whereas in this explanation, Shabbos itself says, please violate me. And it's not just please violate me. This is the way you're going to keep me. You're going to keep me by saving this Jew. Now, I want to share something very, very interesting. If we know this person never kept Shabbos in his life, he's a completely secular Jew, and we're going to assume that he's not going to keep Shabbos later. By this person's logic, do we not break Shabbos? We do break Shabbos. We do. We still violate Shabbos for the Jew, even though we have no idea if he's going to keep Shabbos. Because it's not our business. The fact that he does keep Shabbos, doesn't keep Shabbos, is not my business. That's between him and God. I'm going to try to inspire him to keep Shabbos, but it's not my business. I don't get to play that role of judge and jury and decide who yes and who's not. Torah tells me, look, every Jew is worthy of every Shabbos. And therefore Shabbos says, break me to save that Shabbos, because that's the way you're going to honor me. You're going to honor me Shabbos by saving that person's life. Whether he keeps Shabbos or not your business, and God will deal with that as he sees fit. I don't know that it's a question of violation of Shabbos or other things, but anyway. Yeah. Okay, so we stop over here, and tomorrow we're going to have one more layer of this discussion, and then the Gemara is going to move back on to Yom Kippur, which is where we started. I should say, by the way, that all the practical halacha for Yom Kippur we covered before Yom Kippur. There's other things related to Yom Kippur which are not practical halacha, that's related to Teshuvah, which is very, very beautiful conversations and discussions to look forward to having. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody. Sure, yeah. Everything except for those 3 cardinal sins. And right, and the exception I mentioned before, if the government is there trying to stamp out Judaism. Okay, have a wonderful day, everybody.